Hi, welcome to the Lochdarg YouTube channel and podcast. I'm Marcus, the coordinator of pastoral programs here at Lochdarg. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Fabiola Garza. Fabiola was until very recently a character artist at Disney Design Group in Florida in the USA. In 2014, she published her first children's book, The Story of St. John Paul II, a boy who became Pope. She followed that up then with Princesses of Heaven, The Flowers, published with Bishop Barron's Word on Fire. So I'm interested in speaking to Fabiola today for a number of reasons. Just one of those is the appreciation that we at Lochdarg here have for experiencing God through the arts. So we're actually blessed to have beautiful stained glass windows by Harry Clark here. We've got pieces by Imogen Stewart and much more. It's also, I think, integral to the Christian life more universally and something which I think we should be intentional about in a culture that's often marked, unfortunately, by kind of ugliness and one which inordinately focuses, I think, on utility or what's useful rather than being what's intentional about what's beautiful, what's good, what's true. And I think we should, indeed, we must be intentional about beauty in this present age. So I suppose, first of all, with all that said, Fabiola, can you tell us a little bit about your background, maybe the religious context that you grew up in, and how you became maybe so conscientious about your faith?
Course. So I was born in Mexico City. I'm a cradle Catholic, so both my parents are Catholic. They're both very faithful. My mom is more heart, and my dad is more head when it comes to the faith. My dad's more of the intellectual. And so I moved around all over the place when I was growing up. I lived in Colombia, Istanbul, the US, and I jumped around a lot. And growing up, I always had an I was always a naturally spiritual child. Um, but I don't think I had a very deep grasp of theology at all. You know, I knew more than most kids, but at the same time, I couldn't explain most things if somebody were to ask me. Um, and in college, I ended up at a art school called Rhode Island School of Design, and it's a very liberal place. Not somewhere you go to keep your faith. I think most people that came in practicing Catholics did not leave practicing Catholics. So, but what ended up happening is I ended up dating a Protestant who had a lot of questions or criticisms about my faith. Um, so that sort of propelled me to research, to read. My dad gave me a bunch of books because he was a little worried too.
Hmm.
Um, and I guess my story is not that unique because my dad gave me Rome Sweet Home by Scott Hahn,
Hmm.
which, is a very common story. I found that book very, very moving. Um, so yeah, it kind of went from there. And then there was a small Catholic community on campus. So I sometimes ended up going to daily mass or adoration, and I um, fell in love with the faith in a much deeper way. Um, and it sort of went from there. I ended up joining young adult groups after college and becoming involved then. And it just, since then, um, that's been, the foundation of my life. So, um, yeah, sometimes things happen that you're just very grateful for because I don't know if I hadn't dated, somebody who was very critical of my faith, if I would be where I am today.
Thanks for sharing, Fabiola. And you touched upon a few things there. I wonder if you might say a little bit more about how you navigated that secular space at university, I suppose, in the first place, and then maybe especially in the arts, which seem in many cases, unfortunately today, maybe I'm wrong, to be marked by a kind of stringent secular materialism. In contrast to much of history where the arts were kind of elevated by the church and so on. And thankfully, we do see pockets of revival today. I wonder if that it makes sense to you.
Yes. So one, I was very naive. A lot of things went over my head that now I'm like, I don't know how my parents allowed me to go to this school. But I was very naive. But I naturally gravitated to people that were a little bit more wholesome. So my friends, like my boyfriend was a Christian, so he was naturally a lot more conservative. He didn't partake in a lot of things, drinking, partying, like drugs, those kinds of things. That was just not something we did.
Hmm.
And then my other friends who were not necessarily practicing were also pretty wholesome. They liked reading books, they liked watching Disney movies, dressing up. They were just geeks, you know. It was sweet. So I just surrounded myself with people like that, and I just didn't really get along. I really couldn't connect with people who were more out there. And the Catholic group over at uh, Brown University, even though it was small, sort of kept there. And yeah, I mean, I think it's because the other things weren't of interest to me. They just kind of grossed me out. And I also, it was a time too where people, I think to a certain extent, were a little bit more respectful and not as in your face about, um, you know, being Catholic or conservative or whatever you might want to call it. I remember never being afraid to like speak my mind, even though we didn't really have discussions of those kinds of things in general. I remember doing an art project on abortion. I didn't even think about being nervous about it. I was like, I'm going to do that. And I don't remember anybody coming up to me and being mad at me or anything like that. So it was a different time. I don't think they agreed with me, but it wasn't this kind of very angry, shouty environment, which I feel like we're in now.
Hmm.
Maybe it's because of social media, but it was a time before TikTok and all that. So, um, and Facebook had just started. So there
Hmm.
wasn't that sort of online cattiness happening.
Mm. Thank you so much for sharing, Fabiola. And I want to ask you next a bit more about your vocation. I suppose, how do you see your vocation now, ultimately serving the church, coming from that background? I suppose a lot of people would go to university, they would follow that natural track that is part of the secular society that's just about getting a job and so on. I wonder how that's distinctive now for you as a Christian.
So, but anyway, I did always want to, work for Disney. But I was sort of torn. I really loved children's illustrations and I really wanted to work for an animation studio. Um, I was never, what's it called? Um, Confused as to what path to take because I think something that's very important for artists to realize, especially faithful Christian artists, is that if you live a faithful life, and your foundation is the Lord, um, the things that you will produce will naturally be Christian because they will be good, unless you're going against your conscience or something like that. But what is good is of the Lord. So I didn't really mind if it was labeled, you know, Lives of the Saints or Cinderella, um, which I think can be something very conflicting for a lot of Christian artists. They think, oh, if I'm a faithful person, I have to draw the saints or I have to draw this. Um, uh, your work should be good and in line with the faith, but that's not what God's really going to look at. I mean, yes, that you did good works, but in your daily life, how are you as a Christian? Are you faithful? Are you loving towards your neighbor? All of those things, because I can spend my life doing books of the saints, but I can live an unsaintly life, So I can present this work and God will be like, that's nice, but how was your life? How was your daily living? So yeah, so I was not conflicted in that way. I applied to a lot of animation companies. I ended up working first at a video game company. I don't even play video games, but it was really fun. I designed a lot of objects for this video game. It had elves, it had giants. It was very fun. I had a really good time. I had some really good faith conversations with people there sometimes. The cathedral was right next door, so I would go to daily mass. I think, I don't know, I think I went a little off course. I'm not sure if that answers your question.
No, that's grand. And I suppose to give folks an insight, what did your day-to-day work for Disney look like then?
Okay, so for with Disney, it was sorry, let me get some water. Um, I mean, it was mostly coming into the office, sitting down, saying a quick prayer, and drawing and having some meetings. That's really what it was. Drawing,
Yeah.
having some meetings, having a few chats, but it yeah, there was just a lot of drawing, me sitting down. Because I worked for Disney Consumer Products, so all the art that we were doing was going to be going on product later on. So lots of meetings and just drawing and chatting with people during the day sometimes.
No, that's excellent. Thank you so much, Fabiola. And I have a friend, an icon carver, an artist more broadly, Jonathan Pajot from Canada, and he is doing wonderful work. He has wonderful illustrators to help him release different fairy tales, which he's retelling in a new way that's faithful to the spirit of those stories. And I think your work is alongside that revival in some ways, and it sort of piqued my curiosity pertaining to illustrators specifically, and maybe what is distinct about that form of art that you might think serves God in a kind of distinct and unique manner.
Of course. So I'm going to start with a little story. We used to always, the illustrators at the art school and the painters at the art school. Now, let me just say the painters at the art school were mostly like modern, can't figure out what it means. And we were just drawing princesses and dragons, and we used to make fun of each other, right? Um, so with illustrations, you have to know what you're saying. You know, it has to be clear. You can't be guessing what is going on. You know, you are telling a story. You are conveying a message. It has to further the story. If you're a good illustrator, things that are not in the text will be in the illustration. So it'll be part of the storytelling, right? Um, so there are a lot of incredible illustrators, especially from the golden age of illustration, just gorgeous. But they are about storytelling. That is a very main focus. It is not, ex yes, you can put your heart in, your feelings in, but it's not about you. It's about who will be looking at it and what they will take away from it. So that is a huge, huge thing. Um, you know, in the Bible, God is the storyteller, right? And you're learning things through the Bible. And a lot of times we have illuminated Bibles with beautiful illustrations, and it helps you get to the heart of the text. Now, with good stories, there's always a good message, you know, whether it's implicit or explicit, it hopefully brings you closer to goodness and closer to God. So it's the same way with illustrations. It's supposed to inspire you and help you reach higher and outside yourself and help you wonder and wonder about things beyond and beyond you. So I think that that's the point of illustrations to help you wonder and help you think and open up your eyes to things you can't see. So I think that's the cool thing about illustration. That, yeah, it's not so much about your feelings, it's about a greater story and having the viewer, the reader, come into that story.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much, Fabiola. And I think most welcome for this time. So, I want to discuss just some of the key themes and stories drawn from your works, if we may. So, there's several that I think are both fascinating and relevant to our friends here at Lochderg. So, if we may explore some of those, I'll go to your book first, A Boy Who Became Pope that I mentioned. I suppose,
Yes.
what first drew you to John Paul II then, and what do you hope that folks will take away from that book?
What first drew me was reading about his young life, and it seemed he went through so many hardships. It just, heartbreaking moments with his family and his friends. He lived through World War II and then the communist occupation in Poland. And I read all that, and I thought that would break me, you know. I don't know how this man was able to not only hold it together, but hold so much love that he would be able to share that with so many people and be a support for the whole world. So I was just so impressed, and I was like, how did this man do it? You can say God, obviously, but how? Like, what was his relationship with God? Like, what was his heart like? What was his attitude like? Because many of us are faithful people, and that would, break us. We'd be like, I'm done. This was a horrible time. Um, but um, so the theme that I wove in the book is the question, who do you love most? And it's that question that John Paul II asked himself at very crucial points during his life. And the answer being Jesus Christ is what sustains him. Having something that you love that will always be there, that is your foundation, and that reminder that there is goodness, and that support of goodness is with him throughout his life. Um, that is what sustained him, and love of people. He loved people, you know. So that was really what I wanted people to get out of the book, but children too, because children, you know, as they grow up, they will begin to um, experience hurdles in their life. And having the awareness of asking yourself, I've lost this, but who's still there? And knowing that God is always there, and knowing that that's a good question to ask when you think that you've lost the thing you love the most. There is always something higher. There is God. So it's also meant to help kids begin to experience hard things through somebody else, so
Hmm.
that they can imagine themselves too in similar circumstances and what they would do, and have an example, you know, of how to go through loss and hardship. Because I think sometimes we want to give kids just happy stories, Um, but it's also very important. It is a gentle way to start introducing children to the realities of life while still giving them plenty of hope,
Hmm.
which I think is important. So, because his attitude was so inspiring to me, I wanted other kids to know his incredible story. And it was just very personal. So yeah, that was the result, that book.
Mm. I mean, that's powerful. Thank you so much, Fabiola. And another figure who's been quite seminal in my own understanding of the faith and so on is Marshall McLuhan, who wrote a lot about the digital media and things like that from Canada. But one of his central ideas that many people are familiar with is the medium is the message. So we're not just looking at the content, but we're looking about how we experience things and how different technologies form us and so on. So with that kind of medium as the message in focus, I wanted to ask you a bit about how you hope folks will engage with your book, for example. So this is something I've also spoken about with Jonathan Pajot, whom I mentioned, and we're both keen to revitalize oral storytelling and the fairy folk tales that I talked about previously, and so on, and that will take different forms. But I suppose, unfortunately, for some people, we've lost the joy of reading together, for example. But that is a different experience from reading alone if we get families together. And Megan Cox Gurdon is a lady who's written about the enchanted hour, which I think is a lovely image of what could be for our families and so on. I wonder if you'd like to speak to that and how you'd like to see parents and children read this book and interact with it respectively then.
Oh, there's so many ways that you could read not just this book but any book. So obviously, I really always encourage parents that if it's just going to be, your child can't read yet and you're reading to them, have fun with it. Do voices. Like just do voices, make it fun. If you want to go even further, have objects in the book around you that you can ha hand the child when it appears. You can hand the child the object. I've actually seen a trend that is actually really, really fun, and you can do it with books as well. I don't know if you've seen it. People have been doing it with movies, but when a certain food comes in to they bring the same food to the kids.
Mm,
And so it just becomes really, really fun. You can also put on a play. You know, you're reading the story and you have the kids dress up as the characters, and it becomes even more fun. There are so many ways that you could do these things. Um, so yeah, it sky's the limit with how you're interacting with stories. It just depends how much energy you have and if you want the kids to go to bed. Because if you rile them up too much and you have them doing theatrics, maybe it's not what you're looking for. Um, but, or also, if it's illustrations, if it's a children's book and they can't read yet, you read a little bit, but maybe have the child, once they know the story, have the child tell the story to you. Even if they're not reading, they know the story, maybe you read it the day before, then have them look at the illustrations and have the child tell the story to you
mm,
as they remember it. Doesn't matter if how accurate or not it is. But it's a different way and it helps a child to start storytelling themselves.
mm.
So that could be really fun.
Oh, that's excellent. Thank you so much, Fabiola. And I wonder what you think then, building upon what you've already described about that emphasis in John Paul II's life, what young people can learn from him today and apply to their own lives. I suppose one example that resonated with me over the years was his love of the great outdoors and hiking and so on. And I think that's also relevant to Lough Derg, where we have the Pilgrim Path here. And we're actually creating a trail that will be officially recognized by the Camino de Santiago in Spain. So we love to welcome folks to enjoy the beauty of God's creation in our little part of Ireland. And I wonder if you might speak to that, and maybe it doesn't have to be that example, but just any
Of
example of
course.
your own.
I always think it's great for kids, especially. I think there's so much pressure sometimes from parents and from the kids to the parents to give them iPads and phones and all those things. I think just get them outside, get them playing. Please. Please. That's always like, please. I know it's hard. I know it's hard. But I think that's one of the things. I think one of the big things about John Paul II is he was a very natural person. He wasn't weird. You know, people often think of, very religious people as sort of odd and strange, and he was kind of cool. He was cool. Like that's the thing. He was popular in school, but he was so kind that it was impossible to be jealous of him. That was something that I learned about him that I thought was really beautiful. And I think that's one of the great things about John Paul II because teenagers and kids, they don't want to be weird. They don't. They want to fit in. They want to be part of their friends. And that was one of the big things. And I think that's why he was such a great example. And I'm like, this guy was great. Everybody loved him. He was wonderful. He was normal. He loved to dance. He loved to hike. He liked to do all these things. So I think that is also why he's a great example. Because kids have these, once they start going to school, they have these like social anxieties. They want to fit in. Um, but he was also in a time where it was okay to be religious. So obviously make sure your kids are surrounded by good, faithful families with good, faithful kids as well. So that it's not something that they need to hide. Um, but so there's that, obviously the sports, all that. He loved acting, he loved theater. So he was clearly in love with storytelling too, but through acting. Um, and I'm trying to think what else. But one thing that he always talked about, I think, was that he always saw his father praying, and his prayer life was very, very important to everything. So I don't even know where I was going with this, but yes, so I think it's very important for children to see their parents praying because that was so big for John Paul II.
Mhm.
I could go on and on with him. He was a great friend. He was just, there were so many things, but the greatest thing about his personality was his hope. That was, I think, the big thing that propelled him throughout his life,
Mhm.
looking at life in a hopeful way.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Fabiola. And apropos to the Pilgrims of Hope Jubilee year coming up in the church, which we're focusing on at Lough, and I think what you say about the importance of moral exemplars rather than kind of abstract faith is most vital. And again, that's something that we hope to lead by example on in Lough with young people coming in for retreats and so on. We want them to take away this to incorporate into their day-to-day lives to supplement the good work that hopefully at least some of their families and local churches are doing. So it's not a form of escapism to retreat, but it is part of your day-to-day life to be a saint. That's what we're ultimately called to. And you've also a series of figures like John Paul II, who are wonderful exemplars in Princesses of Heaven, the flowers. So I wonder if you might tell us a bit about that, and maybe actually, first of all, maybe your experience with Word on Fire and what you make of their ministry, because I've been so deeply impressed by Bishop Barron and some of those folks over the years, and actually have some friends that work for Word on Fire Institute, like Dr. Matthew Petruzik, who I think is doing wonderful work with the Word on Fire Institute and so on. Would you like to speak to that?
Sure. I love Word on Fire. I mean, I'm also biased because one of my really good friends is the editor in chief. He's local to Orlando, so I've been friends with him for years. We were part of I haven't been in years, but I met him at the Chesterton Society. So I've known him for years. We'd always wanted to work together. Um, and a friend of mine, Haley Stewart, and ended up being an editor for the children's book division, and she was my friend. So obviously I'm biased towards my friends. I love them; they're great. I've only met Bishop Barron a couple times in person. Obviously, I've listened to so many of his homilies, and yeah, I'm very impressed with the work he's done. I think he's made the faith so accessible to so many people. And he also has that charisma, which I think invites people to listen, people who might not have ever thought they'd be interested in Catholicism. So I've had a wonderful time. They really gave me so much freedom with my own project, um, which is fantastic. I'm very, very grateful, and I'm very, very picky. So they were very patient with me. Very patient, always very kind every time I was like, I don't like that. So they were great. They've been great.
Brilliant. I'm glad to hear that. And like you mentioned before, even the fact that they have a beautifully illuminated Bible and everything,
Yes.
leather-bound Bible to put beauty to the forefront, I think it makes sense that you're a natural fit for them in that respect. And I wonder if you might then say about what you hope readers will take away from that book, which has many of the same stellar themes as the other one mentioned, maybe some of the distinctives.
Of course. So the biggest thing I wanted, particularly little girls, to take away from this is their identity in God and their identity as God's daughter and God's princess. I was always a very big fan of fairy tales ever since I was little, but I think I took them in a way that wasn't helpful for me. Um, so when I was little, instead of putting my identity in God and realizing that I was always already worthy because the Lord had told me I was worthy, I was always seeking to have other people say that I was worth it. You know, I thought I had to be loved. I had to be pretty, smart. Um, and once I found Prince Charming, that's when I would be worth it, be of value rather than God already giving me value. And the only thing I had to do was give back that love that God had given to me. So this is really the sort of the base of the whole book of I don't want little girls to grow up seeking validation, um, where or that fear that they're not worth it. I want them to be very secure in their identity in the Lord and realizing that they don't have to do things to become a princess. They already are a princess. They just have to decide whether they're going to be a good or a bad princess. So that is really that is really the story. And obviously, I wanted to pick the church is universal, so I wanted to pick saints from all over the world because I also loved researching all different cultures. So I thought that was really fun. But I also wanted to pick saints with different charisms, with different paths to holiness, with different vocations, personalities, so that little girls could connect with them on so many different levels.
Mhm.
Lucy loves reading, loves books. So if a little girl loves books, she might connect with them, or they might connect with a Narcissa who's shy. It could be what on whatever level they wanted. They could find some way to connect to each of these saints. So I had so much fun. I also growing up, I obviously there's the Disney princesses, but there's also American Girl. There's clearly this sort of fascination with, groups of girls and connecting with one and following their stories. And it's very natural to little girls. So this book was really meant for me to just do everything I love all together. I love fairy tales. I love the faith. I love princesses. I all those things. That's why it's the work of the heart because it's all the things that I love and make me who I am. And giving it back to little girls. So that really was the main that's how it came into being.
That's terrific. Thank you so much for sharing. And I suppose we'll take those figures one by one, if we may. So I suppose what spoke to you, say, in the story of Joan of Arc, and how might she inspire persons in the church today then?
So with Joan, first of all, I really recommend to anybody to look online because her trial, the trial, it was written down while it was going on, so that's available. That is incredible. It's an incredible resource. It's something that we don't necessarily have for a lot of figures. So it's her story in her own words. It's so powerful. She was so simple and honest. And that was something that was really incredible about her. Um, the thing about Joan, I think, is that she was really brave, but that didn't mean that she wasn't scared. Um, you know, I don't put this in the book, but she she was shown fire to scare her, and she did sign something, and then she found her courage again, and then said, "No, no, I don't. I'm not gonna say that I'm a witch. I'm
Mhm.
not gonna say those things. I'm not gonna lie." So that was the big thing with her is that she was just a faithful, simple girl, um, who was, yeah, very brave because in that time, I can't imagine, um, having the confidence to talk to a slew of soldiers and tell them what to do. I can't imagine in that time, um, being able to do that. And she was a child. She was a child. She died when she was 19, but she started this when she was 17. So that's also what is really impressive. So often in movies about Joan of Arc, obviously they're played by women who are 25, 30 years old. So it really sort of takes away the impact of having just a literal child, a girl, um, be the hope of a nation. So it's really amazing.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. And then maybe lesser known for some of us, maybe in Europe anyway, you tell the story of Sister Saint Josephine Bakita, who originally came from Sudan and who does help to refocus our attention in some ways on the vitality of the church in Africa. I wonder if you might speak about her a little bit.
Of course, she was, I don't know if she's the one of the most impressive too, because she really and I had to be, especially because it's a children's book, especially for very little girls, before bedtime. There were so many things that I had to be very delicate about, and I focused on a time that was obviously ended up being much better for Bequita. But she went through hell and back, It was really a horrendous time. She can't, one of the things about Paquita, she was so traumatized by her experiences in slavery that she couldn't even remember her name. Paquita was given to her by her slaveholder. She could not remember her name, you know? Um, and it's just it's heartbreaking, if you read her biographies. But when she met Christ and entered the convent, um, she forgave all those people. And she said that she would kiss them because were it not for everything she went through, she would not be where she is meeting Christ. And that speaks to the power of grace and the power of having a forgiving heart. And I just think that's why she's so utterly incredible. Her faith was very natural. She was loved in her town in Italy where she joined the sisters. But yes, she's incredible. There were certain things she didn't speak about until much later in life. Um, but again, it speaks to surviving the worst, which I think for so many of us can give us hope, or for other people who are live in war-torn areas or have gone through similar tragedies, having a saint to look up to in those times is huge. So yeah, I think again she's an incredible figure to know and to look up to.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And then another thing I wanted to say was for all the awful things that did seem to happen between the church in the USA and some of the Native Americans, there are many other beautiful relationships and stories to be told, and many blossomed. And there were cases of real mutual enrichment, but it seems, unfortunately, the story is often told in a one-sided manner. I wonder if you might speak to maybe the more fruitful relationship and the story of Saint Kateri Tekakwitha.
Yes, so Saint Kateri Tekakwitha, there are several ways to pronounce her name,
Hmm.
but I'm just going to use what generally in the U.S. people say. Generally in the U.S. they say Kateri, and then I believe the Mohawk people say Gadeli. It's a little bit different, but anyway, to continue, yes. So obviously there were many different groups, a lot of different missionaries that came over to uh, share the faith and convert the indigenous people. There were good groups and then there were not so good groups. Kateri was there at a time when the missionaries that came to her were very good people. They were not violent, anything like that. They followed the precepts of the Pope very, very well, that they were only to convert with a word and example, which is great, which is as it should be. So Kateri met missionaries and very thoroughly impressed with the faith, and she was eventually baptized. And then she did not receive support from her family, and eventually she did go to a mission in Montreal. Um, and she was very prayerful, fasted a lot, maybe a little too much. But she left an incredible impression on the missionaries who were the ones that sort of promulgated her sainthood afterwards. So I think the earliest biography is written by one of those missionaries praising her sanctity. So that was, I think, a good example of missionary work done right, which is fantastic, which is really great. I think obviously we hear a lot more about the abuses, but they went there with the right heart, which is an example that people really do need to see, and really should be the standard, you know.
Hmm.
So yes, Kateri was came out of those relationships with those missionaries, and I've always wanted to go visit her shrine, so maybe one day I'll be able to go.
Yeah, God willing. And if I mispronounce anything, you can correct me. But
Oh, I'm sure I mispronounced everything. I felt bad that I couldn't remember the exact pronunciation. I was like, they taught me. Because I did speak with somebody with an indigenous background who sort of taught me how to say things, but obviously my accent's not that great. So, I was like, I'm just gonna do it the American way.
So another figure then, Narcisa de Jesus, if that's the correct pronunciation, is she's another figure you cover in the book from Ecuador originally in South America. I wonder what struck you most about her story then, and what about her form of saintliness.
Yeah, so what was cool is that I was also trying to find lay people who became saints. Because so often, obviously for obvious reasons, it's usually religious nuns and sisters who we see as saints. So I also wanted to ha little girls to have an example of, if for whatever life circumstances you end up being just a single lay person, that God can have a path for you. So I thought that was like a really cool thing because Narcissa was born to a really big family uh, in Ecuador, and she felt this huge call to serve people in the city, the poor. And then later on, not in the book. Later on in her life, she taught and educated um, young girls who were underprivileged. So that was just something really cool and very different. She was also musical, which I thought was something unique. Um, but that was something that was really lovely about her. She was incredibly prayerful, and she was just one of those. She's a very famous saint over there, obviously, and it's just I also like being able to talk about saints that we usually don't hear about. So I thought it was also a great opportunity to be like, well, let's add some people that are not as well known so that, our company of saint grows so that little kids have even more saints to look up to.
That's lovely. Thank you so much. And Saint Lucy Yi Zhenmei of Sichuan in China is another one. She's one of many martyrs for the faith in China. Can you tell us a little bit about her and some of her virtues then?
Yes. So Lucy she's the one I had the least information on. So I had to go on the very few points that I knew about her, but they were unique enough that I was like, I think I can make this work because I wish we had so much more. And I think sometimes that's a sad thing about not having those resources over there. I mean, over here. But I was like, I think I can make this work because there were certain things that were very unique to her, her illness, her decision to go out and be a catechist, her brother was a doctor, and she did go through that very tumultuous time in China where so many Christians lost their lives. She lived to be in her 50s, I believe, until she was caught and martyred. But for a very long time, she served the church and tirelessly. And she was also known to be very, very smart, which is why she was allowed to be a catechist. That was also something very unique to her. So I thought that was she would be a great sort of at least example for the Christians of China who lost their lives. So I thought it was important for China to have their sort of representation in the book because, again, we don't have as much information about them, but that doesn't mean that they shouldn't be celebrated for everything they sacrificed. So yeah, that I thought that was another really cool thing that if you have a very intellectual kid and who loves books, that they would also be really drawn to her.
Mm.
So yeah, that's kind of why I chose her. Because I looked at a lot of saints from that region and I thought, yeah, I think she's gonna be the one.
No, that's tremendous. And we should also keep the church in China in our prayers. The
Yes.
persecution continues, the underground church and so on, unfortunately. So it's a great message for our present age. Thank you so much, Fabiola. And actually, at Lough Derg, then, so one of the more famous, well-known saints in this part of the world is Saint Therese of Lisieux. We have a statue of Saint Therese here at the Basilica in Lough Derg. Such was the devotion to her at that time and her little way whenever it was placed there. And Bishop Barron, who we've mentioned a few times, has heralded her more recently. I wonder if you'd tell us a bit about her and what you most appreciate about Saint Therese and her Christian way of life then.
Sure. Oh, Saint Therese, when I was going to do Princesses of Heaven, the Flowers, she, of course, had to be in the book. There was no way we were getting around that. We were originally going to do five, and I was like, but we can't bump out Saint Therese. You just can't, you have to have her in. Yeah, because she is called the Little Flower. Um, I mean, she's tremendous. If you haven't read, if anybody in your audience hasn't read Story of a Soul, which is her biography, it's a great place to start. The thing about her that I love, I used to not like her because my dad told me I was like her. And she seemed so emotional and fanciful and just I was like, Dad, I really like her. And so I was kind of like, ugh, I don't like Saint Therese. And then when I grew up and then I reread her story, I realized that she's kind of great because she's so human. She's so human. Her mother used to worry about her because she was very emotional, had a lot of emotions. And then when her mom died, and her sister left to the convent, she had a really hard time. She became incredibly ill. Whether it be anxiety, depression, whatever it is, happened to her, she was just wasting away. And they really thought that she was not going to make it. And she credits um, her recuperation to Our Lady. She saw the statue of Our Lady smile to her, and she miraculously was healed, which is amazing. And so I also think she's also an incredible intercessor for those suffering for any sort of psychiatric issues. Um, it's also the example of those things happen to anybody. It happened to Saint Therese, who was a great saint, and she was lonely and scared and a child. And, that also points to her humanity. Um, and so later on, too, she really wanted to be a nun, really, really wanted to join her sisters in the convent. And again, so emotional, was sad that they weren't letting her go, like such a teenager. And I thought that was what was so cool about her is that um, uh, she was full of passion and love and just really wanted to love our Lord at the convent and was so disappointed when the Pope was like, "No, you have to listen to your dad, listen to your family." She had to be, I was a little bit softer in the book, but she had to be carried out by the guard, like physically carried out because she just couldn't believe that the Pope had said no. But then because of that, she was able to mature and really ponder about what it is to serve the Lord where you are. And so we see her growing in spiritual maturity as well. And then she joins the convent and really becomes this bulwark of just sanctity. And so we see her progression and how she grew into sanctity, which I think is also so important for children who sometimes look at these saints and think they've been holy their whole lives, they've been perfect, they have the perfect personality, they never have any issues, when really we're all a work in progress. And even somebody like Saint Therese, who the whole world knows now, had to wrestle with the parts of her personality that kept her from being who she really needed to be. But there were also parts that were just her. She was very fanciful. She when she was going into the convent, she wrote this invitation that just sounded like it was straight out of a fairy tale. Like, our lords and ladies cometh all to join the great king of on high. And, it was so cute. It was so cute. She was still young. She had this bright imagination. So there were just so many facets of Saint Therese that I think make her just the perfect friend to have on the way to heaven. So that's, I mean, she had to be in there.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Fabiola. And thank you for so much for going through those works. Hopefully, this will act as an inspiration for people to go and buy those and read them together and so on and learn from some of those figures. But I suppose for this afternoon slash this morning, given our time difference, I want to ask what is next for you in terms of your public ministry, since you've been involved in Disney and now you've just recently finished and if you'd like to tell us a bit about that.
Sure. So I made the big decision to leave Disney about a month ago. My last day was last week. Because when Princesses of Heaven came out, it was a huge success, to God's credit. And I was inundated with messages from parents and their children and their experiences and how their children were asking questions about the saints and were talking about heaven and their heavenly crowns and were playing Princesses of Heaven during their playtime at recess. Like it was it was so beautiful that I felt that the Lord was sort of laying out a new path for me. And I he just made it himself. All I had to do was walk on it. So um that's sort of what I'm going to be doing right now. I'm starting the second book in the series of Princesses of Heaven, and as time will allow, I'll do obviously more books, but hopefully I'll branch out into other things um, that will help it grow and help it be something that can accompany children um, in their faith life. So that's really the hope that it's going to be something that makes the faith come alive to the children. Um, and I'm just so grateful that I get to have those interactions. And I'm so grateful for all the parents that even take the time to write me. That is just huge for me. And it's constant encouragement whenever I feel like I'm not doing a good job. So, yeah, that's what I'm going to be doing. I'm going to be focused on that.
That's wonderful. Glory to God, and may it be richly blessed, I hope. And then, where can our viewers or listeners find out more about you and your work and ways to stay connected with what you're doing?
So you can find me on Instagram at Fabiola Garza Creates. And also, if you want to subscribe to my newsletter, you can go to fabiolagarza.com and just scroll down. You can put in your email and subscribe. And yeah, you can also buy books there, but I don't think I ship to Ireland. Not
Hmm.
yet anyway.
Yes.
But it should be Princesses of Heaven should be on Amazon, even in Ireland. So
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Fabiola, and God bless you and your ministry.